So in Salesforce.com, the default setup for security can be found here under Setup, Security Controls, Sharing Settings. By default, these are called org-wide defaults, organization-wide defaults. So by default, when you set up a Salesforce org, information separated by object is set to public read-write, it can be private, it can be public read-only, it can be controlled by parent if it's in a master detail relationship as contacts are in with accounts. But by default, it is public read-write. And what that means is that the information contained within those objects is accessible to all users, and all users can see or edit or save the records contained in those specific objects. Now, the reason that you would change the access from public read-write to something other than that is if you need to restrict access to that information, to those records. Now, if you need to restrict access to even one user, you cannot have it set at public read-write, because this is the base level access setting, and if it's set to public read-write, every user will have access to it. No matter what other settings you put in place, there will still be a way for the user to access that record. So if you need to make it so that it's read-only, so that the user can see but cannot edit, or if you need to hide that record completely from even one user, you have to change the org-wide default settings here. So what you do when you restrict access here is you are changing it from wide open access to access. If you make it, if you set it to private, then only the owner of that record will be able to see or edit that record. No one else by default. So this marking it private or marking it public read only makes it so only the owner can read and write or edit that record. Public read only means that everyone can see it, but only the owner can access it. Share records or share access through sharing settings or sharing rules. And when you set a sharing rule, you do it by object. So here you can see that we are doing a lead sharing rule. That can be based on the record owner, on public groups, on roles, or it can be based on criteria, meaning if the city equals Salt Lake City on the lead or Los Angeles, then share it with this public group or this role or this role subordinates. Now, a public group is controlled here under Manage Users, and in a public group, when you create a new public group, you can add other public groups. If you want to, you can add entire roles, add individual users. So this is the way that you can create sharing setting with a very specific group of users or a set of roles or a set of public groups. So when you share through public groups and through sharing rules, that does not give the people that are having the record shared with them, it does not give them owner-like access, meaning they can't share it then with others. But when you set up that sharing rule, it will give them whatever access you specify whether it is public read-write or public read-only. As you can see here, read-write or read-only are the options that you have to give to them as far as access. So that's public groups. Now, you heard me mention that you can share with roles. So let me explain roles a little bit. Oh, and one other side note on public groups and sharing. So the purpose of a public group or even a role and sharing through roles or sharing rules is to expand access, to open up access, whereas the role, the function of the org-wide default is to restrict or reduce access. So by default, the access to the records is wide open. If you need to restrict that, you restrict it through organizations to where only the owner has access. And then these other tools that we're talking about, roles, sharing rules, some of the others that I'm going to talk about, open up access to a degree, whatever you specify. So let's go into roles. The purpose of a role is to give access not only to, you already have access to the owner has access, but what a role does is you create a hierarchy. So you say, you know, these international sales reps report to the international sales director who the CEO. We've got this line of reporting here, we've got one here, we've got one here. And so what you do when you create a role is you're saying that not only does the owner have access to read and write that record, but anyone above them, directly above them in that line, has access, owner-like access to that record. And when I say owner-like access, I mean that not only do they have access to read and write that to that record, but they have access to share that record as well. And so that's different than the type of access given when using a sharing rule, because when you use a sharing rule, you may give them permission to read and write, but they cannot then share that record with someone else. It's only them that you're giving that access to. Whereas in roles, they do have owner-like access. Now, because there is a direct hierarchy here and a line of reporting, someone here that owns a record is not, this person here is not going to be able to see and or access that record because they're not in the line of reporting or they're not in the same hierarchy. Similar with this person, because they're not in this sales rep's line of reporting or hierarchy, they cannot see this. The CEO can see everything, but only those who are above the owner in the hierarchy will have owner-like access. The way you can set up roles is, this is just an example of how that would be set up. I'm going to click Expand All here so that we can see the tree or the role hierarchy that's set up in this org. So we can see that the CEO is at the top. Anyone in this line, or you can see that has the collapsible section, reports directly to the CEO. And then you can see that we have other people here that report to the SVP, that reports to the CEO. We've got other people here that it goes down quite a bit further. So we've got the Eastern sales team that reports to the Director of Direct Sales, who reports to the VP of North American Sales, who reports to the SVP, so on, so on. So just so we can see that a little bit easier, I'm going to close those other ones and close that so we can see this direct line goes through the SVP to the CEO. So if someone in the Western sales team role owns a record, the VP of North American that the VP of Marketing will not be able to see that, either will the VP of International Sales, but the SVP will, and then the CEO will. These others, since they are not in the line of the hierarchy, will not be able to see that. So that's how roles work. That extends owner-like access. Now there are some other ways to share that. So going back here to sharing settings, you can see that I have marked cases as private. Another way you can share, besides using the sharing rules here, and I will go to cases and show you how this works, is this is called manual sharing. So if an object is marked private at the org-wide default, there will be a sharing button here. If it is not marked private, you won't see this button. But when you share it here, you can see who has access and how much access and why over here. So you can add another person, you can add a public group, you can share it with a role, or you can share it with just a specific user. I'm going to share it here with Michael Scott, and I'm going to give him just read-only access to that case. So I'll save there. You can see now that Michael Scott has read-only access, and the reason he does is because of manual sharing. So that is a way you can share. Another way you can share is in accounts and opportunities. You have what are called opportunity teams or account teams. That's something that you can set up here. So I'm going to go here and go to account teams. Yes, this is something that you have to enable. So I'm going to enable account teams, click save. And then now as I go back to this account and refresh the page, let's see. Okay, I'm going to need to edit the layout, add the account team to the layout. So I'll go to related lists and account teams, and I'm going to drag that down there. And then I'll click save. I'm going to add this so that it overwrites everyone's personal layouts, just so they can all see this now. So as I go down here, I can see that I have the account team. I can add members to this team. I'm going to look up member here, going to add Michael Scott, give him access to read-write on the account, the opportunity, and the cases are marked private, but I'm going to give him read-write access to that as well. So I'll click save on that. Sorry, I need to explain why I'm giving them the access. Say he's a sales rep, click save, and now you can see that he is on the account team. And so now Michael Scott would be able to see the account, the opportunity, and the case. And he would have access to read-write on all of those, but would not have access to be able to share that with others. So let's go back to the setup. So roles, we were talking about the roles and the role hierarchy. Just so you know, that controls what records you have access to and whether you have read-only access or read-write access. Another big part of security is profiles. Now profiles, there are quite a few default or standard profiles in Salesforce, and you cannot edit a standard profile. You can clone a standard profile to make a new one, and then you can edit it from there. So I'm going to go to a custom profile here, the sales profile. I'll click on that. Then I will click edit, and you can see that we have access to change a lot of different settings, what apps they see, what tabs they can see by default, their administrative permissions, general user permissions, but what I want to focus on here is the object permissions, which goes along with what we've been talking about as far as the org-wide defaults and the sharing settings and the roles. So we have here access, the basic access, which we call CRED access, C-R-E-D. That stands for create, edit, or I'm sorry, create, read, edit, delete. Sometimes in Salesforce documentation you will see them use the word CRUD, C-R-U-D, access, which essentially stands for the same thing, but it's create, read, update, and delete. I prefer using CRED access because it actually matches the terminology used in Salesforce, the permissions here. So you can give them read, create, edit, or delete access. I'm going to talk about the view all, modify all in just a minute. Now, by giving them access, this is restricting access further. This is not opening up access beyond what they have from the role hierarchy and the org-wide defaults. So for example, if you give them access to read, create, edit, and delete accounts, if they don't have access to a record because, let's say, cases are private, this is not going to give them access that they don't otherwise have. This is determining what they can do with the records they can already see, meaning either they're the owner or they're in the role hierarchy above someone who is the owner, or it's been shared with them through a rule or manually. So with those records that they already have access to, they can read, create, edit, but as you can see here, they cannot delete those records. So don't get that confused with the CRED access, thinking that perhaps you're going to give, share additional records with users by changing these settings here, because you're not giving them anything more, you're just restricting what they can already have. Now, an exception to that is the data administration. If you give them view all data, they have, you can see here, if you want users with this profile to have view access to all records, the selected object type, regardless of the sharing settings for the object. So view all and modify all actually overwrite any other settings, whether they be the role hierarchy or the org-wide default. So by checking this box, you are actually giving them admin-like access to this specific object. This is a sharp sword here that you're giving to people if you give this. It's overriding anything else. So unless there's a very specific reason to give that access, I recommend using other types of sharing to give people the access that they need. Now there's one other way you can do that, and if you click here, this modify all data in the administrative permissions section, it will give them modify all in all of these. See how I just checked that? And now they have access to everything. So you have just overridden, by checking that box, you gave them a bunch more permissions in this section and this section, and then you also gave them access. You overwrote all of the access there. So this, again, is really admin type access by checking the modify all data. So again, a very sharp sword. Use it if you need that. So let's see here. So we've talked about public groups. Let's talk about permission sets. So you can give access through a profile, but let's say you have let's say you have a sales team and you have 2 members of that sales team that need a little bit more access to a specific object. Actually, just going to hit cancel on here so I can zero out the changes that I made by clicking that modify all button. You can see we're now back to where we were before. So if you want to give just a couple of members access to additional functionality, the way you would do that is through a permission set. So through a permission set, what you do is you create a name, let's say test set, tell what kind of license they're going to need. This is, you can see that it has to be a specified license, and the users that will be assigned to this will have to have that license. So we'll save that. And then once you do that, you can go through and give them the permissions that you want. So let's just say on cases, I want to give them the access to be able to, I want to change their access to cases. So I want them to be able to delete cases as well as create them. Now if we go back to the profile, let me just open that in another so you can see the difference here. And custom sales profile. So we can see down here that on cases they don't have the access to delete it, but through the permission set, I am giving them access to be able to delete that. Now the way you assign users to this, you can manage assignments and see who has the ability to do that. I'm going to permission to Michael Scott, so I'll assign him there, click done, and so Michael Scott now has the ability to delete cases. He has to create, read, edit, and delete access to cases. So that's the reason you would use a permission set rather than just creating a new profile is so that you can give that access to a small group of users, and so that because the rest of their functionality is the same as all of the other sales users, you won't have to modify 2 profiles anytime you need to change access for that entire group. So it's a way to cut down on the administrative time it takes to maintain security settings, and you can do it based on actual assignment, or you can actually do it on based on criteria as well. So that is security settings there. So another way you can control access is through field level security. So let's take a look at the account. Now what this does is you can see, let's view let's actually view by profiles. So we can see on, let's take a look at that sales profile. We can see that what fields they have access to and what level of access they have. We can see that the account source field is hidden because of a page layout. We can see that, let's change that. So we can change the field level security so that they can never, ever see that field, no matter what. Or you can do it by the page layout, meaning if they have access to this page layout, they can't see it, but if they have access to a different page layout that gives them permission, they will be able to see it. So field level security, best practice is to, if you need to hide something from somebody just for convenience or to declutter their page layout, use the page layout. If you need to hide it from them at all times, use field level security. If you just hide it from them on a page layout, they still may be able to see that record in a report or through some other way. But if you hide it from them using field level security, then they will never be able to see it. It's easier to maintain using page layouts, but it's more secure to use field level security. So if it's just a matter of convenience, I always just hide it on the page layout. If it's a matter of security, I will always use field level security. So other security settings that you can use are password policies. I'm not going to go into, it's pretty self-explanatory, but you can edit session settings, mark how long before they are timed out of the session. You can make it so that they can't change the IP address. There are a lot of different settings here. You can lock, make it so that if they're within a specific IP range, it means that if they log into Salesforce from that IP range, they won't have to go through the activation process. You can see what activations have already happened here, and you can remove those activations so they have to activate again. So there are quite a few security controls, but what we wanted to focus mainly on in this webinar is the security around org-wide defaults, roles, profiles, sharing, public groups, etc.